everyone. We're back for more. Today on animal behavior, we're going to talk about endocrine effects. And this is one of the proximate mechanisms that we're really want to understand and have some basis in order to think about how do behaviors show up in different groups of animals, what drives those kinds of behaviors. Proximate mechanisms are the ones that cause a behavior to happen within an individual, and we can talk about sort of how they can be the product of selection in class, but we want to just go through a quick version of what they look like in different groups. And so to do this, we need to think about the endocrine system. The endocrine system really is just a network of glands that allow for the secretion of hormones into either lymphatic systems or into the bloodstream. And this becomes a really interesting dynamic because that means that the source of the behavior can be at some distance and as a result at some time delay away from the target of that particular hormone. So here's your little endocrine cells. They're releasing all these hormones into the bloodstream, and they're moving down the bloodstream to these target cells. If these target cells are far away in the body, then it's a longer time before the initial reaction begins to take place. If they're close to each other, then it can be a much quicker reaction time. And so we got to think about sort of these kinds of dynamics with respect to how hormones actually can regulate behavior in a couple of different ways. And so there's some really great examples of both of these, and we're going to sort of compare and contrast them a little bit and say, hey, here's what's going on. The first one actually comes from looking at mice. People have done a bunch of studies on mice, and in particular have looked at position of the fetal mouse within the mother. And if you look at this sort of diagram, so here's mouse, here's her uterus, and each one of these is a potential fetus in her uterus. And each of these we can sort of sex them and understand what kind of individuals they are. So here is a male, this is a male, and we're calling it a 2M male because this male is surrounded by a brother on each side. This male, 1M male, is surrounded by a brother on one side and a sister on the other side. We have these 2F females as well. So people looked at the position of the fetus within the uterus with respect to its siblings, and then looked at the impacts on future behavior. Well, what's different about them in the first place? Males are males because one of the things that drives the production of male characteristics is testosterone. One of the things that drives the production of female characteristics is estrogen. So a female fetus developing female characteristics has estrogen floating through her, and placentas are remarkably leaky. So there is estrogen floating around her. There is testosterone floating around this male, and those hormones could be potentially impacting the siblings around them. This is what people actually wanted to look at. So in some of these studies, they actually found that when you take these individuals into adulthood, that males who were in the fetus surrounded by other males are more aggressive as adults than males who are surrounded by sisters. So a 2M male surrounded by brothers, a 0M male surrounded by sisters. Males who were surrounded by females also ended up being less sexual as adults. Oh, but you say, what about the impacts of hormones after they are birthed, after they leave the fetus? Well, in some of these studies, what they actually did was to castrate the males as soon as they were born. So they injected them with controlled levels of testosterone after birth, so that what you actually get is the only difference between these males is the amount of testosterone they were exposed to in the fetus. And you still see these really different size effects in aggression and sexual behavior. In females who are surrounded by brothers, they tend to be more aggressive than females who are surrounded by sisters. So we've got all of these things, all these hormones driving these, not even just the start of a behavior, but actually the development of a whole suite of behaviors. We call this an organizational effects of hormone, because these effects then carry through the rest of the lives of the animals. It affects how the animals develop and are put together. So it's an organizational effect of hormones. But what causes these hormones to be released in the first place? Generally speaking, hormonal release is the result of some kind of interaction with the environment. So that can be the result of visual stimuli, the result of acoustic stimuli, that can be timing, it can be weather patterns, it can be all sorts of things, but some interaction with the environment causes the hormones to be released into the system. What is a hormone, actually? And how do they actually work once we get in there? Well, hormones are just chemical signals. They're chemicals that move through the body. In order for them to have an effect on the body, in order for them to cause a behavior, hormone has to be released from its site of production. The target cell, or the cell that's going to have an action, has to have the correct receptor sites for that particular hormone. And then that target cell, when it binds to the hormone, may receive a change or incur a change in protein synthesis or in gene expression in some ways. And those change in gene products then result in altered behaviors in those individuals. And this can get really complicated because as we start moving into different levels of hormones, what we see is that you get not just individual hormones, but these what we call hormonal cascades. One great example of this you can actually see on campus. This little lizard is an Anolis carolinensis, anole. Anoles actually go into hibernation. So, today it's cold, it's in the 20s. These little lizards are hibernating around campus right now. And as it gets warm, they'll start coming out. In order for these individuals to start becoming reproductive, they need levels of reproductive hormones to rise. So after hibernation, these pituitary gonadotropic hormones in females will start to go up. And in order for a female to produce eggs that can be fertilized, she needs high levels of these pituitary gonadotropic hormones. If she hatches, or if she comes out of hibernation and she moves around very slowly over time, those levels will go up and she'll become reproductive. But if she sees a male, so female, here's a little male, and he's got this dewlap, and if she sees him flashing her that dewlap, that actually can increase the rate of PGH production, of pituitary gonadotropic hormone production. The pituitary gonadotropic hormone doesn't by itself do anything except trigger the release of estrogen. And estrogen then binds both to other parts of the body and to the brain, which preps the brain for copulation. This is a hormonal cascade because it's one hormone not initially causing a behavior, but it's one hormone triggering another hormone, which then is responsible for triggering the behavior. The behavior could happen alone without some of these other triggers, but this sort of visual stimulus increases the rate at which the behavior is elicited. And so here is the male. He's going to show up for you. Oh, no, he's not, because I can't find the media. All right, we'll play that in class. All right. So what do the hormones actually do? They actually change the probability that a particular stimulus that you see, so the site of that male, elicits a particular behavior, which in this case is, or in the case of the anoles, reproductive behaviors. Hormones modify probabilities. They don't actually cause it to happen all the time. They can trigger onset and offset. They can prime things. And when we talk about hormonal levels changing and resulting in an alteration in a behavior in the short term, that is an activational effect of a hormone, in contrast to the organizational ones, which impact the development of behaviors and really the development of the whole body over time.